When you're building applications with JavaScript, one of the primary pieces of data that you're going to work with, in addition to objects, which we covered in a previous episode of Feature Fundamentals. So if you haven't seen that, check out the link below. I've linked it up. It's the one on JavaScript objects. So in addition to JavaScript objects, JavaScript arrays are one of the most common pieces of data or types of data that you're going to interact with inside of your application. So an array is simply a pair of square brackets and then some data inside. So we've got like 1, 2, 3. So here I've got like an array of numbers, or I can do an array of strings. So we'll say like my name. I'm not going to tell you my middle name because I really don't like it. that's a secret. You'll have to squeeze that one out of me. But that's the basic idea of what an array is. So it's just these square brackets and then some type of data inside. And we can put all kinds of stuff in there. So we can do strings, we can do numbers, we can do objects, we can do other arrays. So I can do some things. We can say like, I don't know, for some reason we want to nest arrays of numbers, which stuff like this does come up. It's not terribly common, but you will find situations where you'll have to have nested arrays. But that's usually when you're getting more advanced or you're working on some specific application logic. So if that looks confusing or scary, don't worry about it. That's something that's only really going to come up, when you're getting into, more hardcore feature development. So don't stress about that. So that's the basic idea of defining an array. And what I want to do for the rest of this example is kind of show you a mix of different arrays. So depending on the work that we're doing, we're going to look at different types of arrays. But the most important one that we're going to deal with is right here. So what we're going to do is create a shopping cart. Now this is going to be very simple. We're not going to build a fully interactive shopping cart, but we're just going to pretend here that this is a shopping cart that we've implemented in an application, and we're going to go ahead and work with this data in some way using different array methods. So in JavaScript, and this is at the prototype level. So in JavaScript, there's this concept of a prototype, which is basically like the base definition of how something works in JavaScript. So arrays in JavaScript have their own prototype, and on that prototype, there are a bunch of built-in methods. So built-in methods are just different functions that we can call in relation to an array to do something with it. And we're going to look at all that stuff in a little bit here. So the first thing I want to talk about is accessing the values of an array. So here we've got this shopping cart array, and if you haven't already checked it out, we've got another feature fundamentals on variables. So if this looks a little funky where I'm saying const shopping cart, definitely go and check that out. That's also linked up down below. So you've got const shopping cart here as a variable, and we're assigning an array to it. And the array that we're assigning to it is an array of objects. So here we've got the items in our shopping cart, and each of these objects is describing what the item is. So we've got a unique ID for it. We're giving it a name, a price, and a quantity. So each item in our cart has that information so that we can work with it. So if we want to access these values, the simplest way to do this with JavaScript is to provide an index. So what we can do, so I'm going to say console.log here, and then I'm going to say shopping cart, so our variable. So if we do this by itself, we're going to see that we get the entire shopping cart, or the entire array of items in our shopping cart. But if we want a specific one, what I'm going to do is put brackets on the end, and then I'm going to pass in an index number is what this is called. So when you're dealing with arrays in JavaScript, you have to keep in mind that they're zero based, meaning the first item is technically not in position 1, it's in position 0. So if you ever get confused where you see a 0 in somebody's code and you're like, wait a minute, what is this 0? That's because the index of that item is 0. And this plays out again and again. So when you're dealing with arrays, you have to know that your indexes are set to 0. And you might have a little bit of like a desire to say, okay, I want to just add 1 to this so that it's always 1 based. From experience, don't do that. That can get you into a lot of trouble. Because it can get confusing after a while. So you really want to get used to having this 0-based index when you're dealing with stuff. So in this case, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. And so let's say we wanted to get our carton of eggs. So down here we said 0, 1, 2. So if we change this to 2, we get carton of eggs printing out. So it's pretty simple. So that's a very basic way of working with accessing values on a JavaScript array. But there's a ton of different ways to do this. So we're going to look at a few more here. So another one is, and this isn't necessarily a way to access values, but it's kind of like checking, does this thing exist? Now, you can see over here, I've got the index of method. So the index of method is kind of limited in scope of behavior. So technically speaking, we can't really use it with an array like this where we've got an array of objects and we'd need to test some value in one of those objects. But we can use it for more simple arrays. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and clear this stuff out. And we're going to create an array of numbers. We're going to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now what we're trying to figure out is, well, what is the index of one of these numbers? So what I'm going to say is console.log. And we'll do numbers, and let's go ahead and clear this out. So we get our array of numbers. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the brackets on the end, and I'm going to say, give me numbers.index of 5. And so this may look a little weird. This is saying numbers.index of 5. So what this is doing, and we want to focus specifically on this code, what this is doing is it's saying, find me in this array the number 5, and then give me its index. So we know that it's looking for the number 5 because that's what we passed here. So if I pass the number 3, we get 3 down here. So we're trying to get the index of it, and we get it down below. So let's take this out, and we'll just say, give us 2. So we get 3 back. So what we're trying to say here, and let me actually kind of whip up a better example here. So I'm going to say console.log numbers.index of 3. There we go. So now we get the number 2 back. So that's the index of 3 in this array. Now this is a very strange way of trying to look for data inside of an array. You will see it from time to time. Typically it's used for evaluation, like should I do something based on this? So we'll do something like this. So if you have an if statement, and this is typically where you'll see this used, we're going to say something like if numbers.index of, we'll say 3 is greater than -1, we'll do something. So we'll say console.log hello. So right now we can see hello is printing out because the index of 3 inside of this numbers array is greater than -1. So that -1 is a little strange. So that -1 is what the index of method in JavaScript is going to return if the item doesn't exist in the array. So remember, we're starting at a possible 0 all the way up to technically infinity. So we have 0 as our starting point. So if it doesn't exist, we're going to get -1, so below 0. And so what ends up happening is this code evaluates because it says, well, index of 3, yeah, that's 2. Okay, that's greater than -1. Cool. Let me go ahead and log out this hello statement. And so we can change this. So if I go back here and I say, let's delete the 3, nothing happens like we'd expect because the index of 3 is now -1 because it doesn't even exist in that array. So that's a very simple version of trying to figure out does something exist in this array. But another version of this is the includes method. Now this is kind of the more, I guess you'd call it, modern approach. It's newer JavaScript, we'll say, but it's also kind of limited in scope. So what we're going to say is console.log, and we'll do this with our numbers array here. So we're going to say numbers.includes 4. And we see that we get back a Boolean true. So what's interesting about this is that unlike the index of method where we're actually getting the index of the number in the array, here we're just saying, does this thing exist? Is it actually here? Yes or no? And that's it. So we can say something like, let's do another if statement. So we'll say if numbers includes 4, put it in a console. I won't get rid of this. So we'll say, holy crap, it has a 4. There we go. So this works because we do have a 4. So again, let's go ahead and clear this out. If I get rid of that 4, no, it doesn't work. Nothing happens. If I change it to a 2, that's a little backwards, but it makes sense, right? So we've got numbers.includes 2, and then we get our message that's a little backwards. So let's correct that. There we go. So now we've got, holy crap, it has a 2. So that's the basis of the includes method. So that's just us trying to say, okay, does this thing exist in here? Yes or no. Now, where we get into the more advanced stuff, and this is kind of why I'm rushing through these, because the index of and includes are very limited. Usually, you're only going to use it for a quick evaluation of saying like, oh, does this ID exist in this array of user IDs? So what I mean by that is, if we say, let's change this real quick. We're going to say user IDs, and we'll say we've got, I don't know, we'll say ABC 1 2 3, ABC 4 5 6, ABC 7 8 9. So if I was going to use this in my actual code, I might have something like user IDs includes ABC 4 5 6. So we'll say the second user, and we don't want to say it has a 2. So let's clear that out, and we'll say, I don't know, this code is going to break intentionally, but it'll hopefully get the point across. So if user IDs includes ABC 4 5 6, well, I might want to say charge user credit card, and then we'll say ABC 4 5 6. And just to make sure that's clear, we'll have charge user credit card as a function. And then we'll say console.log. We'll do it with the backticks here. So we'll use string interpolation. So we're going to say charging user, and then we'll spit out what is their user ID. There we go. And let's clear this, and we'll kind of evaluate it again now that we got it working. It's going to go. Let's do a space here. There we go. So I've kind of messed up our string a little bit, but hopefully the point gets across. So what we're saying is, if this user actually exists, then we can charge their credit card because they actually exist. They're a real user. So that's typically when you would use something like it includes, is you're just trying to verify, okay, is this thing or is this person or is this doodle actually here, or am I just trying to call code against something that doesn't exist? And again, that's when you're getting a little more advanced, because you're going to get into what's called flow control, and we're going to talk about flow control in an upcoming feature fundamentals, and that's stuff like this. So like if statements and else statements and all that jazz. We're going to get into that, but that's basically when you would use something like this. So going back to the find method here, the find method is something that I really personally enjoy. It's something I use probably daily, if I had to think about it, at least a couple times a week. And the idea here is exactly what the name implies. So find is helping us to find the first instance of some match to some logic in our code. And that sounds really confusing. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a const, and we're going to say protein bars equals, and we're going to write shopping cart. So this is the variable containing our array. And we're going to say in the shopping cart, we want to find something. And so in order to write a find function or use the find function, what we're going to do is we're going to pass a function. And that function, if I can keep it sticking around here, there we go. So that function is going to take each item in the shopping cart. So we're going to say item here. So the idea is that we have multiple items in our array. And what find is doing is it's looping over. So it's going to go, is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? And until it finds a match, it's going to keep doing that. So what we're doing here is we're going to say shopping cart.find. And what we're trying to say is we want to find the item, and we're going to say where the item.name is equal to, and I'm using triple equals here so that we have absolute equality. So technically you can get away with doing that to say, does the name equal protein bars? But when we add the extra equals, what that's doing is it's making sure that not only the value is the same or the value matches, but also the type of data. So we're making sure that item.name is a string and it's equal to protein bars. So what we're doing here is we're saying in the shopping cart, find the item where the name is protein bars. So it's going to say not this one, this one. So if we look, I'm going to console.log here, protein bars, and we should get back our protein bars object, and we do. So the idea here is that we're trying to find a specific thing in this array, but we don't necessarily know where it is. We just know something about that data. So in this case, we're saying, oh, well, I want the protein bars. So if we were building like an actual checkout, this might come in handy when we're trying to say, oh, I don't know. We found that the user had added some other health food. Maybe they have like protein powder or something like that in their cart. And then we want to say, like, we're going to upsell them on some stuff. So we're going to recommend some items. We're going to say, like, oh, hey, you should also check this out. And the also check this out part is us saying, like, well, what should they also check out if they have protein powder in their cart? Well, they should have protein bars. That's a good one. So as the creators of the application or the developers of the application, what we want to be able to do is say, well, go and find that thing in an array of other things. And again, that's kind of a contrived example, but that is something that you'll come across when you're doing this. But this is super helpful when it comes to digging out data from an array, because you can do all sorts of equality here. So we could even say, find the first item where the price is greater than 2. And in this case, we get apples. So the first item with a price in the array greater than 2 is 5. So apples right here. We could say, we can even go crazier with it. So we'll say greater than 4. And did I do that correctly? Oh, no, I'm just stupid. I was looking at this number thinking that was the highest. We want to say greater than 5 here. So let's clear this out. And then we'll change that to a 5er. There you go. Okay, so now we get the protein bars because that's the first item in the array greater than 5. So we have 5 here, and then we have 10, so we get that item back. So again, this is super, super powerful and super helpful. Now, one of the things that you're probably more familiar with than anything is the concept of looping, or the technical term is iterating over an array. So earlier I hinted when this find method runs, we're saying this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. That process is known as looping or iterating over an array, and that's not something that we personally do. That's something that JavaScript does internally in memory, so we don't actually have to manage that process. So what we're going to look at is a very simple example using this array of numbers here. So if I want to loop over this, and looping over something, it really depends on the logic of your application and what you're trying to do. We're going to look at some examples here, but basically this is, when you're working with arrays, probably the most common way that you're going to work with them, second to accessing the value in an array. So what we're going to do is we're going to say numbers.forEach. So forEach is another method built into the JavaScript prototype. And this lets us say, do something, and the doing something is this function here. Do something for each value in this array, or in this case, each number in this array. And when we call this function, what we're going to get is we're going to get the number that we're currently looping over, the current item, so, or value is a better way to say it. So this is something that you can name whatever you'd like. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we know these are numbers, so we can call this a number. Or we could just leave it as value by itself. But it does help to give some context in your code to say, like, well, what am I looping over here? Each of what am I getting? So that's the first argument to the forEach function. And then the second is the index. So just like we saw earlier, we were talking about the index being 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So here, what we're going to get is both the number and the index that we're currently looping over. So if I say the number at index, I'll say index is, and then we can do this little trick. So we'll put a space and then we'll say the number here. There we go. So we get the number at index 0 is 1, which is correct. The number at index 1 is 2, that's correct, and so on. So that's all printing out. And notice what's happening here. And we'll just change this. We'll have some fun with it. So we'll say the doodle. So the doodle at index, notice that this instantly, as soon as this code is evaluated, prints out each of these. So what's happening is it's saying for each number, so the first one here, I need to console log this out. So I need to tell you what the index is and the number. So when I say I need to tell you, I'm talking about the console log statement here. So the console log statement is saying, oh, okay, cool. Let me tell you what the current index and number is that we're looping over. So we can see in order, we get the first number 1, then the second 2, 3, 4, 5. And we get our index as well with it. So that's a very simple version of looping over the data. So typically speaking, you're going to be doing some work when it comes to using a loop. You're not just going to say this unless you're debugging something. And that's one of the cool parts about stuff like console log statements in JavaScript is you're essentially just saying like, okay, let me use the tools that I'm also writing my application with to debug it, which is pretty, I don't want to say it's uncommon, but I would say console.log and a lot of the stuff that's built into JavaScript, that's one of the best implementations of that sort of thinking in a language that I've come across. So pretty fortunate to have that here. But when it comes to using a for each, typically we're not going to do this. We're going to have some sort of thing happening. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this example. And what we want to do, we'll walk through this here. So let me get rid of that comment and we'll see what it does. Okay. So what's going on here, and this should look somewhat familiar. So we've got a new variable being introduced. So we've got let total, and we're using a let here. So pay attention to that. And then we've got our shopping cart from earlier, same exact data, same exact items. And then now what we're doing is we're taking this for each loop and we're actually doing some work. And the work that we're doing here is we're adding to the total the price of the item times its quantity. So like here we've got 5 times 4, so we should get 20 back for that. So what we're trying to do is add up the total amount in our cart. So this is something that we would actually have to do if we were building a shopping cart. We'd have to say, well, okay, for each item, how much does it cost? How many does the customer want here? So we're going to get back 20 for this first item. Now, if we're doing a total for an entire cart, well, we don't just care about the first one, we care about all of them. And so that's where our for each comes in handy here. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, set the total by default to 0, give us the data that we're working with, and then we're going to say for each item in the shopping cart, and you can see here we've changed the name here to item. Again, this could be value, but we're going to call it item to make it more explicit about what's contained in the array. So we're going to say for each item, we want to say take the current value of total, so we start at 0, and we're going to say plus equals. So this operator is making it so that we can take whatever the current value of the total variable is and add to it whatever is on the right side of the operator. So we're saying to the total, add to the existing value whatever the result of this math is. So we're saying here, take the item that we're currently looping over, give us its price, and we want to multiply that by the current item's quantity. So again, for this first one, we should get 20. Second one, we should get 10, $2.99, $4.99. And so once we run that, what we're doing, if we look, we're adding for each thing that we iterate over, for each item, we're saying add to the total. And because we're doing an add to the existing total, well, because we're modifying it, we're saying the total now equals this. So on the first loop, we should only get 20. And let's see if we can demonstrate this. Let me clear that out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all the other items. So I'm going to comment those out. We can see that because there's only one item in our array, we get 20. So now if we clear this and we're going to say, let's make it 2 items. Now we get 30 because we've got 5 times 4, 20, 10 times 1, 10. So 20 plus 10 is 30. And so the idea here is that this is just going to keep looping over the items, doing that math until it reaches the end. And for each loop, it's going to add to the total. And then when all is said and done, we get our total. So when I console log total here, this is basically coming out after this for each loop has completed, meaning it's gotten through every item in the array. So that's something to really keep in mind as you're working with a for each statement, is that it's something called blocking in JavaScript. So literally when you're executing JavaScript code, JavaScript has to stop and think about things. And so the more you're giving it to do, the more it has to think about. So it would be like me in person saying, I want you to do these 3 tasks. So I want you to wash the dishes, I want you to sweep the floor, and I want you to make the bed, right? And so that's not too overwhelming. That's stuff that you can process, but you still have to do it in sequence. So you can't do all of those things simultaneously. JavaScript is very similar with certain things. So a for each loop has to finish processing before it can console log total. So if we think about it, we've got, okay, JavaScript, go ahead and set this total to 0. That's pretty quick. Okay, I've got it. Then go ahead and define this array in memory. Okay, got it. Then I want you to loop over everything in that array, and then it's got to think about that. So it's going to say, oh, okay, take care of that one, take care of that one, take care of that one, take care of that one. Okay, I'm done. Now I want you to console log total. Okay, I just console log the total. So this is, again, it's blocking. So it's blocking what's known as the JavaScript event loop, which is where all of the events or all of the tasks that we're asking JavaScript to perform for us via our code. So we're not adding directly to this. So just by virtue of writing our code, we're adding things to the JavaScript event loop, or the call stack is another name for it. So we're adding to that. But essentially that's what's going on. JavaScript is going to have to stop and think briefly. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you got to be careful with this stuff, because if you have an array of, like, I don't know, we'll say 1,000 items, whatever time that's going to take to process, you're going to be waiting. And so you got to be careful with how you write your code so that you don't accidentally lock up your application. And we're going to talk about that kind of stuff, further down the road in these feature fundamental videos, but something to keep in mind now. Or if you get confused because you give this thing a bunch of data and you're looping over and you're like, wait a minute, this is locking my application, or the browser's freezing up or something, that's likely wise, because it's just trying to do all of the work you asked it to do, and it's a little bit overwhelmed, because technically speaking, your JavaScript code can only execute as fast as the computer you're running that code on can handle. So if I have a very slow processor and not a lot of memory, well, it's going to take longer than a computer with a bigger processor and a ton of memory. So definitely keep that in mind. So another variant of this, and we're going to look at this now, we're just going to copy paste this one, is the for loop. And this one you've probably seen a little more often than the for each loop, or you've probably seen them equally the same. But the for loop is kind of one of the like default pieces of JavaScript that you'll see in like the first wow factor you get. So you've probably seen this before. So the for loop is this chunk of code right here. And again, we've got same exact stuff up here. We've got a total variable, shopping cart, same items, same everything. But now we've changed how we're looping over those items. So instead of the for each, what we're doing is we're using the for loop. So the for loop is saying, okay, first I need to define a current index for the item that I'm looping over. Or my starting point is a better way to say this. So I'm starting with the index 0. And you'll notice that we're giving this a name. So we're calling this item, but sometimes in code you'll see this just referenced as I. That I is short for index. So you can call it index, you can call it I. Some people will give it a weird value. They'll call it like A or something. But generally I recommend, because JavaScript can handle it, it's not going to be too overwhelming, to just give it an actual name, because that's something your brain is going to understand. So we're saying, okay, the current item or item is 0. We're starting at 0. So we say that first, and then we say, okay, we want to do this loop while item is less than the number returned by shopping cart.length. So we're saying, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the length, and this is where you can get confused, so be careful with this. The length of our array is going to be returned as an actual not 0-based number. It's going to be 1-based. So literally 1, 2, 3, 4. So the length of our array is 4. So we're saying while this 0 is less than 4, do something. And the thing that we're doing is we're saying we want to increment this item value by 1. So that plus equals is coming back again. So we're saying increment item, whatever its current value is, by 1. So on the first loop, it's going to say, okay, I'm gonna call this code, and then it's going to say, okay, now, once I've finished the work here, and we'll talk about this in a sec, once I finish that work, now I need to increment item by 1, and then do it again. And keep in mind that this code is going to keep executing as long as item here, whatever we've currently set it to, is less than shopping cart.length. So we should get, on the first run, it's 0, then it's 1, then it's 2, then it's 3. And we never get to 4 because, well, that evaluation has completed. It's saying this item is now less than shopping cart.length, but shopping cart.length is only 4. So if we try and do it again, it's not going to work because 3 is less than 4. So hopefully that part's clear. So now when it comes to actually doing the work inside of this for loop, so this is us defining the loop, but this stuff, so everything between these curly braces is the actual work. Well, we're technically doing the exact same thing that we were doing with the for each. The difference is how we access the value that we're currently referencing inside of the loop. So you'll notice that I've changed the syntax here. So instead of saying item.price directly, now I have to say shopping cart item with the curly or the square brackets dot price. So what's going on here is, remember, we only know the index now. We don't know the specific item that we're looping over. We only know the index of that item. So in order to get some value from that item, we have to actually go and get it from the array. And like we saw earlier, remember that we had something like this. We would say shopping cart, square bracket, 0. So what's happening in this loop is we're saying like, well, the index is going to keep changing here. This is, we don't have control. Well, we do have control over it, but technically speaking, once we've defined this code, we don't have control over it. So it's just going to keep going. It's going to keep changing the number for us. And so because of that, we need to be able to say, well, give us the shopping cart and then give us the item at the current value or the current index item is set to. So when this first runs, it's going to be 0, then it's going to be 1, then it's going to be 2, then it's going to be 3. And this code, when we evaluate it, well, we expect that to be one of the objects in our array, or the item in our shopping cart. So we should be able to say, okay, at item 0 in the shopping cart, give us its price and multiply that by item 0 in the shopping cart with its quantity. Next loop comes around. Well, now we've got shopping cart 1. So this is the first index. So 0 index, 1 index. So at the 1 index, well, now give me the protein bars price and give me the protein bars quantity and let me multiply them and then set that to the total. And so we can see when this actually evaluates, so we'll get rid of this so it reruns here, we get the same exact result or same exact response as we did with the for each loop. So the work is essentially the same. It's just that the means are different. So how we're getting there is different. So for loops are, you got to be careful with them because you can kind of create some trouble for yourself in terms of extra code that you shouldn't need to write. And it can just be kind of sloppy. I've seen a lot of kind of early developers will want to rely on the for loop because that's the example they see a lot. But generally speaking, I would say you're probably going to want to tend toward the for each loop if you can, if you're doing this type of work. But sometimes you do actually need to reference based on the index, so it's a little more helpful to use a for loop. But I would say more common, or ideally more common, is the for each loop in your own code. So next up is the while loop. So while loops are very similar. And this one we're going to very quickly go over here so we can keep moving. So here you'll notice that we get the same exact result once this evaluates. But the idea here is that notice I've added another variable. So I've said current item. So the difference between for loops, for each loops, and while loops is that while loops are basically saying while something is happening, do this. So literally, as long as this is true, I'm going to keep executing this code. All right. So what we're doing here to put this to use, so I'm saying while some current item value is less than shopping cart.length. Now this is very similar to what we just looked at with the for loop. So we've got some item is less than shopping cart.length. The idea here, the principle here is exactly the same. So what we're doing is we're saying while the current item value is less than shopping cart.length, do literally the exact same thing that we just did, this part, the exact same thing that we did in the for loop. So we have to reference the item in the array by the index and by the quantity. So we're doing the exact same thing to add to our total here. Now, the thing that's different is that the while loop doesn't give us any means for iterating or changing the value of current item. So like we saw with the for loop, we have a built-in convention for saying for each iteration of the loop, do something. So in this case, increment item by 1. While loops don't give us that control. So we have to introduce that ourselves. And so that's what we've done here. We've said, okay, current item is our index. So this is analogous to let item equal 0 here. But then what we're saying is down here, for each iteration of the loop or for each evaluation of the loop, now we're going to manually increment current item by 1. So as we do this, we're saying, okay, go ahead and run this. So current item 0 less than shopping cart length, yes. Okay, now plus 1, so now it's at 1 the next time it loops around, and then 2, and then 3, and then it's done. And so that's the basic idea here. Now, while loops are, again, another one of those things that you want to use sparingly for a couple of reasons. One is you can screw up with these very easily. And like the name implies, while something is true, they're going to run. So these things can chew up memory. So they are, I think this is true, don't hold me to this, but I think that while loops are slightly more efficient in terms of the memory that they do take up, But if you make a mistake with them, you lose that advantage, because essentially what happens is, well, now you've just loaded down either the browser, or if you're using something like Node.js, you've loaded down the server with tons and tons and tons of calls that are unnecessary. So you got to be careful with them. But they are useful to know about, and they are something that you will likely come across in somebody's code. So keep that in mind. So that's the basics of looping over arrays. But now I want to talk about modifying arrays. And we're going to kind of breeze through this because some of these are very simple and not too confusing. Others are a little more involved, but we're gonna try and speed ourselves up here. So we're gonna clear that out. And what I want to do is start with this example here. Now, this is the simplest way to modify an array. So we can see that up here I've got this line where I've got an array of numbers, 1 through 5, but then I've got this new line of code here. So I'm saying numbers.push6. And we can see that when I log numbers now, so after this line has been evaluated and then we log numbers, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if we look at this like this, we're going to say console log numbers. Notice how, and let's make sure this is clear. So we're going to clear that out. So notice when we first log it, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we're saying push 6, and then we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So just like the name is suggesting, what's happening here is we're pushing a number into the array. We're pushing some value into this array. So just the same, I could say, I don't know, push turkey into the array. And we'll see I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turkey. So that sounds like a good like kids game or something, like Duck Duck Goose or something. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turkey. You can have that one for free. I'll let you take it. So that's the basic idea of modifying with push. It's very simple, but what we're saying is we want to add to the end of this array. And we have to stress that it is adding to the end of the array. It's not adding to a specific position. So if you're just saying, I need to add this to my list, like if we click a button like add to cart, well, we want to add that item or push that item to the end of our cart or add it to our cart. So that's the basis of doing that. Now, the more advanced stuff that you're going to get into is stuff like this map. So let's go ahead and copy this, kind of walk through it here. Let me clear this, see if I can get it to run again. Let's put a space in apples. Does that make it happy? Oh, well, see, folks, sometimes I'm smart. A lot of the time I'm dumb. So you got to bear with me here. So I wasn't even logging out the value. So we're going to say shopping cart with tax included. And let's see. So let's clear that out. Now we're going to run this again. There it goes. Okay. So what we're up to here, let's push these up, is we're trying to say, well, realistically, we can't get away with selling items in, at least here in the United States, without charging some tax. Somebody's hands got to get greased here. So realistically, well, we're not just going to add up the total of our cart and then say, okay, this is it. This is the total. We're going to have to kind of extract some tax for the man, out of what somebody's paying to us. So in order to figure that out, well, we need to be able to know what is the price of our stuff with tax included. And so what we're doing here, and just like the name implies, so we've got our regular shopping cart, just like we've been working with, and then we're saying shopping cart with tax included. And we're setting that variable equal to shoppingcart.map. So this is the new method that we're working with here. So we're saying .map. And so what we're doing with a map is we're trying to modify the contents of an array in some way. So that's it. So when we say map over something, we're going to map over it, and for each value, we want to make some change to that array, and then we're going to return the modified copy. So what's neat about this is not modifying shopping cart directly. It's saying, let me make a copy of it, then modify it, and then return you that copy. So that's why I've got it behind a variable here. So we've got shopping cart with tax included. And we'll notice that we input with 5, 10, 2.99, 49, but down here we're getting something like 5.25, 10.50, 3.13, and it kind of ignore this. So this is the result of us not rounding off the numbers at all. So this is just JavaScript being basically a computer, it's saying like, oh, this is the exact math. This is what you asked me for. So that's the exact value. But typically, if we're using this in an application, we'll round these values. So we've got, looks like about 314 if we round it up, and then we've got 524 if we round it up. But this is noticeably different than what we've got up here. And so the way that this code is working is we're saying, okay, for each item, and again, the same exact principle we've seen with the for each loop and everything else, we're passing ourselves the current value. So this could be value, but here we're saying this is the item in the cart. So we're saying for each item, we want to return a new object. And on that object, we want to spread out the contents of whatever that item is. And again, if you haven't watched the video or read the post on JavaScript objects, go and check that out because I do go into detail on what this thing is. But basically what you want to know is that we're taking the contents, the entire content, so all of these properties and values of each object or each item that we're looping over, and we're saying copy those to this new object here with the curly braces. So we copy the full contents, and then we want to change the price value. So technically we're copying price over in here. And so what we want to do now is, well, we've copied the original price, but we want to modify it. So using the spread operator, we can copy an entire object, but then if we put the same property name after something we've already copied, this one's going to win. So this is going to take precedence. So what we're doing by taking advantage of that is we're saying, okay, we're going to define price, and we're going to set it equal to the current item's price plus that current item's price times 0.05%. Or just 0.05, so 5%. So what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, overwrite the current value of price in the array, so 5, with the result of saying 5 plus 5 times 0.05. And so that's what gets us, if we go back up here, 525. And so what we're doing for each iteration of this loop is we're modifying the price to be that new value. And so by the time this all finishes, we're going to get back a new array looking exactly like our shopping cart, but the prices are being overwritten with the result of this math, and so we get back an array with 525, 1050, 314, 524, and so that's with our math done. So that's pretty cool. This is when you're starting to get into the noticeably more advanced stuff with arrays, is you can do some really cool stuff like this and save yourself a ton of time. So we could have achieved this exact same thing by writing for loops or for each loops, but the map is purpose built for this task. So it's helping us to modify an array's content to do something else with them. So that's pretty neat. So another one of these is the filter method. So the filter method, and I'm going to do that. And let's clear out our console so we don't get confused here. So we're going to say clear out the console. And then we're going to take inexpensive items here. We're going to log this. So we'll notice that when we log this inexpensive items value, we're only getting 2. So we're saying shopping cart, and we've got all these items up here, but we only get 2 back. So the reason why is that we're using the filter method. So again, just like we saw with for each, just like we saw with map, we're being passed the current item, and then we can do something with that item. So what we're trying to answer with this filter method, what we're trying to do with this filter method is we're saying we want to keep everything in the shopping cart array that passes some test. And that test is whatever code we've got here. So we're saying, oh, geez, I don't know if you could hear that. That was my belly grumbling. If you heard that, that was, whew, I need some breakfast after we finish this one up. So what this is doing is it's saying shopping cart.filter, keeping everything that does pass this test. Now this is confusing, and that's why my word stumbled there, is this takes a second to get familiar with. So we're saying keep everything in the shopping cart array that passes this test or returns true for this test. So we're saying we want to keep all of the items in the shopping cart with a price less than 5. So we're trying to find all of the inexpensive items in our cart. So the items with a price less than 5 here are the carton of eggs and the coffee beans. And so what's going to happen is we're going to get back, just like we saw with the map, we're going to get back a brand new array. So we're going to get back that array with only the 2 items that are less than 5. So filters are super helpful. You can use this for technically deleting stuff. So a common pattern that I like to use the filter for is I'll say, okay, given a list of things, if I want to delete one of these, I'm going to click on a button and I'm going to give myself the ID of whatever the thing it is I'm trying to delete in the array. And then technically I know, well, if I'm going to remove something from the array, technically I'm filtering it out. So I can just say filter out the item or only give me back the items where the ID does not equal the one that I'm giving you right now. So if I say I want to delete protein bars from the array, I only want to keep the items where the item.id does not equal, and we'll say 2 in this case. So if I clear that, let's see, was I quick enough? Looks like I was. So notice I get back apples, carton of eggs, coffee beans, but protein bars is gone because I'm saying, well, I want to delete that item from the array or filter that item out, and so we don't get it back, which is pretty neat. So another one of these methods, and this one is probably the best use case for a shopping cart. So we've been talking up until now about creating a total. So we need to know how much is our user spending. So let's go ahead and clear that, and we'll do that. See if it barks at me. What's it going to do it? No, it's not. So let's put a space up in apples. There we go. Okay, so the basic idea here is that, well, and let's not confuse here. We'll get rid of that. It should go again. There it goes. So the basic idea here is that, well, we have an array of items, and we know that we're going to have to check the user out at some point. And so just like we saw earlier when we were doing the for each loop, well, what did we do? Well, we put a variable called total outside of the loop, and then we said for each iteration of the loop, we want to add to that total, and then eventually we want to log it. So that's all well and good, and that's perfectly valid code, but it's not the most efficient way to do that. So in JavaScript, we have the reduce method as well. So the reduce method is a little different. This one takes a second and some practice with, but once you understand what it's doing, it's like, wow, this is super powerful. So what the reduce method is doing, kind of like the name implies, it's a little confusing, is it's trying to reduce down some data to an end result. And so in our case, what we're saying is, well, given this shopping cart, we want to get back a total. And you can see here I'm storing this in a variable called total. So that's one hint about how this works. So what we're doing with reduce is we're saying, okay, for each item in our array, we want to call this function, and we want to start from this value. So starting from this value, notice I put 0 here. So this is literally the starting point for our total. And so what we're saying is for each loop of this function, or each call of this function, we want to modify that value. And then when all is said and done, we want to return whatever the final value is after we've modified it with each iteration of our loop. And so what we're saying here is, well, start at 0, and that value is always going to be passed as the first argument to the reduce function. So we're saying, okay, we want to pass ourselves 0 on the first loop, then we're going to get whatever. So in this case, we know the answer here. So 5 times 4 is 20. So the first loop, it's going to be 0, and then we're going to add 20 to it, and then we're going to add the next value to it, 10, and then it's going to keep going. And then we get back our total. So here we see the exact same response we've been getting with our other codes. We've got 3798. And so the idea here is that we're going to say, okay, for the first iteration, running total is 0. And you'll notice we put a return statement here. So this is important. We have to return what we want the new value to be, or the new running total to be. So we're saying, well, the new running total should be the current running total plus equals. So again, we're overriding, or we're assigning to the existing value. We're adding to the existing value. And we're saying, well, we want to assign or add the item.price times the item.quantity. And so just like we saw before, this is going to run for each item in our array. But the difference is that because we're returning a new running total and we're modifying this default value, when all is said and done, like we can see here, we're returning the final number, or the final thing that we reduced down to. So I guess that's the way that they were trying to sell this one. So the final number that we reduced down to, and in this case, we get our total, which is 3798, which is pretty cool. So that one is super powerful. This is clearly like the calculator method, as it were, in JavaScript. It's something that is very, I would say, and I don't want to say it's uncommon, but it is something that is good to know about. It comes up enough, and typically it is with doing stuff like this. So I'm trying to add something up. Technically speaking, you don't just have to pass numbers here, or you can't just pass numbers here. You can pass. I've seen people do objects, other arrays, so you can use this in some interesting ways. But typically speaking, you're going to do just some simple math with it to add something up or to total something up, which is pretty cool. So to wrap up, we've got just a few more. How many more did I give you here? Yeah, we've got 3 more things to cover, and these are really quick. So the next one I want to show you is reverse. So we're going to bring back a simple example here. So I'm going to say numbers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to console.log. Let's clear this out. I'm going to say console.log numbers.reverse. So what we'll notice here is that what actually prints out is, well, what we'd expect, the reverse of this array. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then when we call the .reverse method on it, we're literally changing that array's contents in memory. So now we're saying numbers.reverse. So let's see what we're doing here. Let's say console log numbers. And we'll notice that we're getting 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the thing that's interesting about reverse is we're actually modifying the value stored in this variable. So numbers is set to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by default. But as soon as we call this, we're modifying it permanently in memory. So now the next time we log numbers, we get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So this is useful for the exact reason you would think, which is, well, I don't need them in that order. I need them in the opposite order. So very simple thing, but very helpful to know about. Another one is sorting. So sorting does exactly what you'd expect it to do. So I get this array of jumbled numbers, and in this case, you know, I forget the name of the song, surprisingly, but 8675309 is stuck in my memory. So, well, realistically, we're not calling a phone number here. We want to get this array in order. So what I'm going to say is, well, console.log numbers.sort. And so now we take this jumble of numbers and we're going to get 0, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So now it's in order. Sort is exactly what you'd expect. Now, sort is kind of limited here. So sort is simple in the sense that it cannot do nested values like the objects we saw. So you got to be very careful with it. So if it's just very simple stuff like I want to sort some numbers, or for example, if I want to sort some strings, so we'll take the Beatles here and we'll copy them over. And then we're going to go ahead and sort that list of Beatles. Like, well, now we get, instead of John, Paul, Ringo, George, we get George, John, Paul, Ringo. So those are alphabetically in order. So for very simple sorts, like a simple is that a word? Alphabetization? We're going to go with it. So for a simple alphabetizing or alphabetization, that doesn't come out. Alphabetization. I don't think that's a word. It sorts it alphabetically. There you go. So it sorts it alphabetically with strings, or if it's numbers, it'll obviously just do a straight sort on those numbers. But keep in mind that is pretty limited. And yeah, you just got to kind of use it where you can, and it is helpful sometimes. So the last one I want to show you here is the spread operator. Now, if you've already watched the video we did here on JavaScript objects, this will look pretty familiar. But the basic idea here is that this plays very similar into how arrays work. So we're going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to let this log out here. So we'll notice that what's happening here is we start with 2 separate arrays. So we've got lucky numbers and we've got unlucky numbers. And now the way that we're doing this is we're saying, well, we want to add lucky numbers to a new array. So the new array is this set of square brackets. So we've got a square bracket to open, square bracket to close. And we're saying in that array, we want to put lucky numbers and unlucky numbers. But notice what we're doing before each one is we're saying ... So that's the spread operator. So what that's doing is it's saying, and this is identical to what we saw with the objects. The only difference here is that we're dealing with an array type of data, not an object type of data. So, and I'm going to explain something about that. That's interesting. So we're saying unpack the contents, or copy is another way to think about it. Copy the contents of this array into this position in the new array. And we're saying copy the contents. So we're not taking the entire array and doing something like this. We're not creating a nested array. We're saying literally take the contents of this array and spread them out into this array. So we're saying copy 19, 113, and 152 into this new array called lottery. So we're doing that in the first position, and we're saying now do the exact same thing with the unlucky numbers. So we're basically saying combine together those 2 sets of numbers into one array. And so we can see when we look down below, well, what do we get back? We get the combined array. Now, the thing you need to keep in mind is that position matters here. So if I reverse this, so I'm going to say we'll put unlucky numbers first and then the lucky numbers. Well, what happens? We get this array's contents first, followed by this array's contents. So if you're trying to combine two arrays together, or you're trying to create copies of arrays, this is how you want to do it, especially with modern JavaScript, because it's a heck of a lot easier than the stuff you had to do before. You had to do like really silly looping and a bunch of extra variables and stuff. But now with the spread operator, makes this kind of work super, super easy. So that's what's going on there. Now, to wrap up, I do want to point something out. So I just kind of hinted at it a few minutes ago, which is arrays technically in JavaScript are objects. So what I mean by that, and let's clear this out. We'll just say const empty array equals an empty array. And then I'm going to use the JavaScript type of operator. So let's clear this. And we're going to say type of empty array. There it goes. So you notice we get back object, which is pretty interesting. So we'd expect the type of an empty array to be an array, but technically in JavaScript, it treats arrays as objects, which is very strange, but something that's important to know about. So if you ever have to do this equality, like you're trying to figure out, is this thing an array or not? Technically using type of isn't going to work. So you have to do something like this. So you have to say empty array, and you want to say, is it an instance of an array? And you'll notice back here we get true. So if I change this to, let's do this again, we're going to change this to an object, and we get false. So that's one of those little quirks about JavaScript that you got to keep in mind. Technically, arrays, as far as the JavaScript specification are concerned, are treated as objects. So that's a good little nugget to wrap up with here. And we're about an hour deep at this point, so I know that's a lot, but honestly, this is important stuff. So if you're going to work with JavaScript and you're going to build applications with JavaScript, you got to know this. So hopefully this stuff was helpful. I really appreciate you folks watching. If you haven't already, make sure to go ahead and subscribe down below so you can get these videos as soon as they come out. We've got a few more JavaScript basics, and then we're going to get into some fun stuff. So we're going to be talking about things like HTTP and how the actual internet works and how all of these different parts kind of play together. So we've got some really exciting content coming up. So definitely hit subscribe. And if you want to get these as soon as they're released, also remember to hit the bell, so that way you're going to get notifications up in the top right corner as soon as I put these out. And it should be every week. I took off the week before because I was a little bit busy, but yeah, they should be coming out every week. So definitely stay tuned. There's a lot of good stuff coming. And if you have any questions, definitely leave a comment down below. So I want to hear from you folks, and I want to know, is this stuff helpful? But I also want to know, what are you struggling with, or what is something you're curious about? Because there's so much stuff to cover, and it can all be kind of confusing and overwhelming. So definitely leave comments. I'd be happy to answer your questions for you. So I think we're going to wrap up there, folks. Thanks for watching, and we will see you for the next Feature Fundamentals.